Hello and welcome. First, let me say thank you for joining us today. And also, we have closed captioning. So you can see the CC prompt is available. You can access the captions by pressing CC at the button, toward the bottom of the screen. And I'll give people a few moments to do so. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Lisa Coleman, and I am the Senior Vice President for Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation here at NYU, and I use she and her pronouns. And welcome again. We're thrilled to have this conversation this evening. Before we begin, I would like to honor and acknowledge the Indigenous peoples whose lands we now occupy. We acknowledge that we are gathered here in this virtual space, but many of our institutions and homes are located on the unceded lands of Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge that in the United States, we acknowledge that the United States was founded upon the exclusions and the erasures of many Indigenous peoples, as well as this discounted labor and intellectual innovations of many Indigenous and other marginalized peoples. We continue our efforts to both recognize and dismantle these systemic exclusions and systems of oppression. We also honor all those who've come before us, our ancestors who've paved the way for us doing this important work across our institutions. Let us pause for a moment in silence in recognition and honor. Thank you. I want to say a special thanks to the NYU LGBTQ Alumni Network and the NYU Women's Initiative for your partnership. Can't thank you enough. To Amanda, thank you to Janine and other colleagues in UDAR for your leadership and commitment to global inclusion, diversity, belonging, equity, and access. My team in OGI and everyone working behind the scenes, thank you, thank you, thank you for making this program possible. And I have to give a special shout out to Chris Woods and Lucetto. This program is part of the NYU Lead series, NYU Women Lead series. And with Women Lead is a global leadership accelerator that celebrates and amplifies the prolific work of global women trailblazers. That we honor those past and present while centering intersectional gender equity and innovative leadership. It is my great pleasure to welcome our honored guest this evening. And I will ask Gayatri to join us on camera now.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi. So I am so looking forward to this conversation. Gayatri is part of our faculty here at NYU, and of course, this important text, which many of you may have already read, but as has been noted, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the scholars that have noted some of this work. And we welcome you as the director of the NYU Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality. And of course, thank you for your research and also for your work, particularly in these, your two monographs, Impossible Desires, Queer Diasporas. Excuse me, my notes are flying before me. And let me also say, most importantly, I do want to give a big shout out because you are the principal investigator of the Feminist Queer Studies Collective at NYU, an initiative funded by the Mellon Foundation, and congratulations to you on that.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Of course. So we're going to jump into this conversation, and I'm sorry I have to do a little maintenance here because my computer has frozen, believe it or not. Of course it has, in the midst of this. So as we jump into this conversation, what I also want to first, and let me just say this because this is the most important part as I raise my glass to you. My mug, as I say, because I would toast you, but since we're going into the conversation, I'll have the cocktail later. Yes. But I would like to just say, on behalf of NYU, thank you for your amazing contributions and your work. And we are so privileged to present you with the Dorothy Height Award. Dorothy Height was a student and also worked at NYU, and as many know, was the founder of one of the largest organizations for women of color in the United States. And so congratulations to you. Thank you for the work that you've done in terms of gender equity, but also in terms of innovation and really thinking about these intersections, right, of immigration, of status, of queerness. And so cheers to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lisa, I mean, I have to say this is just such a tremendous honor. I feel incredibly humbled by it, and it's actually, to be honest, it's quite hard to take it in. It's really very meaningful for me, especially coming from your office, the Office of Global Inclusion, NYU Women Leads, and then in the name of Dorothy Height. So the significance of that is really not lost on me. And so it's a tremendous honor, but it's also, I think, a responsibility and a charge to truly embody intersectional feminist scholarship and pedagogy in everything I do. So just thank you so much, Lisa. It means the world to me, really.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And like I said, we are thrilled, and we're mostly thrilled to be able to feature your work. So thank you. And that will bring us to, of course, this discussion. I'm hoping that they are dropping your bio for those of you who are very interested, of course, in learning more about Professor Gopinath, that you will have the access to that information. As we also move forward, please be aware that this program is being recorded, and we will take questions at the conclusion of the main session. Please feel free to use the Q&A box, and as we get to the Q&A section, I will be then pulling those out. Let me begin now by talking about this amazing, amazing text. And I just have to tell everyone, such a pleasure to read it. So first of all, it's just a good read, just solidly a good read. But the other is just so many concepts. And I've already said this to Professor Gopinath. We can have a conversation about this for the next 3 hours. But so Unruly Visions, let's talk about this and the aesthetics. And let's talk a little bit about, oh my gosh, my notes are changing all the time. And so let's talk about this first part of this. So you make connections to your earlier work around the conceptualization of this idea of queer diaspora, and particularly is thinking of this constellation, right? Mm-hmm. And that you're not tied to or bound by nation, right? And so really thinking about these disruptions that you bring, really thinking about the disruption to patriarchy, Eurocentrism, et cetera. Could you share a little bit about your journey in realizing this idea of disruption in this particular kind of way? Absolutely. And then the second part, is I'm going to ask you, how does this connect to your idea of intersectional feminist queer studies collective, excuse me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa, for giving me the opportunity to think about the connections between the books and just your rendering of the project of both books. So I'm going to actually share my screen because I thought it would be useful to just see some of, see the book images, since I'm presuming not everyone knows of this work. Okay.
Yes.
Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. So Lisa asked how the second book, Unruly Visions, is connected to the first book. So my first book, Impossible Desires, Queer Diasporas in South Asian Public Cultures, was, as Lisa suggested, centrally interested in theorizing queer diaspora as a concept that did two things. It challenges the primacy of the nation state on the one hand and of heteronormativity on the other, right? And so I did that in the book by tracing the way in which South Asian diasporic texts, and I was looking at film, music, literature, performance. So both these texts and audiences travel transnationally, and how the sort of and the different sort of logics of gender and sexuality, the different contestations around gender and sexuality that emerge in that process of transnational movement. So that was, the book emerged out of my dissertation that, I finished in the late 90s. And so, the book came out in 2005. And, it was during that time, I think, of the late 90s to sort of the mid 2000s, that the field of queer diaspora studies really emerged. And I just want to say this was very much a collective project. And I'm saying this really for the benefit of my students, I think some of whom are probably tuning in, because I want them to know the genealogy of this field. So, I, along with, many others in the late 90s, were thinking about how can we read queerness across different national contexts? What does queerness mean in the process of movement, migration, diasporic dislocation? And so, some of us who did that work, Jose Munoz's work, of course, that came out in 1999, Disidentifications, but then also folks like Martin Manalansan, Juana Maria Rodriguez, Arnaldo Cruz Malave, Alicia Fiormata, Nayan Shah, David Eng. And I just want to name those names because, as I said, it was really a collective project. And I also want to recognize the work of somebody who's not often thought about in this frame of queer studies, and that's the work of the Caribbean feminist queer scholar, M. Jackie Alexander. And, I think her work has been really foundational in many ways. And so for those of you, especially the students out there who don't know Jackie's work, I think it would really open up a lot of doors in terms of doing this kind of transnational queer feminist theorizing. So let me just move my slide to the next one. So Unruly Visions then builds upon the first book in its understanding of the work that the aesthetic practices that emerge out of these queer diasporic formations. And, ultimately this book is about radical relationality. It's about intimacies across difference. And so while the first book, as I mentioned, was really focused on South Asian diasporic cultural production, Unruly Visions puts South Asian diasporic artists in conversation with artists from multiple diasporas. I'm looking at African-American, Lebanese, Latinx, indigenous texts, right? And I'm trying to think about intersecting, overlapping, overlapping diasporas rather than simply one trajectory. So one of the things I'm arguing in the book is that if colonial modernity obscures the connections and obscures the affiliations between these different social formations, the aesthetic is in some ways the space where we can make those affiliations and intimacies apparent, right? And these are intimacies across time, across space, across disciplinary divides. So Lisa, I'm delighted that you asked about how this work is connected to the project of the collective that I'm doing. As Lisa mentioned, I'm the PI for the Intersectional Feminist Studies Collective, Intersectional Feminist / Queer Studies Collective at NYU, and that queer part is really central to me, of course. So I just wanted to say a few words about that. So this collective, as Lisa mentioned, it's a 3-year Mellon-funded initiative. I'm sorry the slide doesn't show up very well, but we're calling our collective Beyond a Boundary. And that's taken from CLR James, CLR James's classic work on cricket, Beyond a Boundary. And so our goal with this collective is precisely to move beyond the boundaries of institutions, disciplines, geographies. And so what we're trying to do is promote and make concrete the affiliations and connections that are institutional spaces and the power dynamics within them don't make easy, right? That make actually very difficult and preclude in some ways. So what the collective does is it's bringing together faculty, students, artists, activists from a range of disciplines from all over the tri-state area, NYU, CUNY, Stony Brook, Barnard, Rutgers. And one of the most important aspects of the collective is the work that we're doing with community-based organizations as well as artists. So we're putting the CBOs and artists in conversation with the academic community throughout the space of New York City. So we're partnering with two community-based organizations. One is called Red Canary Song. It's a really radical sex worker collective of Asian migrants, Asian American and Asian migrants based in Flushing, Queens. And the other is a organization called Coalición Mexicana based in the Bronx that caters to Latinx migrant populations and particularly Latin American indigenous populations. So, it was really important for us to move from Manhattan to Flushing to the Bronx and not be sort of Manhattan centric, to sort of map the city in this capacious way. And along with that, we're working with a different artist each year. And so we're trying to build connections between the CBOs, between the community-based organizations and the artists and the academic scholars that we're working with. So the beautiful image you see here is from one of the artists we're working with. His name is Felipe Baeza, and he works, his work really beautifully engages with what it means to be queer, what it means to be undocumented, what it means to straddle the line between Mexico and the US. So we're working with him, we're putting him in conversation with Coalición Mexicana, and he's going to actually do a mural for them out in the Bronx. And then the other artist we're working with is Shazia Sikandar, who's a Pakistani American artist, and we're actually opening an exhibition of her work tomorrow. So for those of you here in the NYC area, I really urge you to come by. It's going to be tomorrow at 19 Washington Square North, which is the Abu Dhabi Center in New York at NYU. And this exhibition is called, we titled it Lost, Longing, Belonging, Shazia Sikandar's Korfakan series. And it's these series of photographs she took in an abandoned movie theater in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. And it showcases the sort of the in-between state of South Asian migrants and South Asian laborers in the UAE. And I thought it's such a powerful and important way to make connections between sort of embodied, gendered labor in different forms. We're working with this sex worker collective here, and then we're thinking about sort of gendered migrant labor in the UAE. So that's kind of the broad, capacious mapping that we're trying to do with this collective. So I'll end there. I'll say a little bit more about Shazia's work later on.
Okay, thank you so much. And I thank you for making the connections, because I think it's really important. And also, thank you for bringing up people like Jackie Alexander and the names and really naming the work, because I think that legacy is important of what's brought you to this work, and even informing the intersectional work that you're doing with Mellon, and of course, even with the exhibitions coming forward. And congratulations on that as well. So as we move to the next question, which is really thinking about this idea of visibility and invisibility, right? And so you've said that your work is not about making the visible the invisible, or excavating, right, the dominant, but looking for this for alternative possibilities. So could you talk to us a little bit about how you've thought about that in terms of methodology and the transformative process of that?
Absolutely. So, one of the main points in Unruly Visions is precisely, as you suggest, to imagine alternatives, right? And in that sense, my work is squarely in the School of Queer Studies that is exemplified by scholars like Jose Munoz, like Jack Halberstam, and others, where it really is about turning to the aesthetic, to queer performance, to queer art, to imagine possibilities and alternatives to the here and now. And so, the question of the archival and the past emerges here because in these art practices that I'm looking at in this book, we see that these artists are often turning to the past in order to imagine these new possibilities in the present and in the future. Mm-hmm. And so Munoz has this great line where he says, these aesthetic works enact a backward glance or envision a backward glance that enacts a future vision, right? And so it's the backward glance that allows the possibilities in the future. So, as you suggested, Lisa, and as you picked up in the book, I'm not so much interested in sort of dissections of the dominant. I think we all know what foreclosure feels like, what dead ends feel like, what deferrals feel like.
Right.
And so the book is much more interested precisely in imagining differently, right? So, I'm really interested, as I said, in how these artists sort of excavate these sort of occluded pasts to imagine the future and to imagine even their presence differently. So, just to give you an example of how this works, the cover of my book comes from the Beirut-based artist Akram Zaatari, who has amassed an archive of studio photographs from South Lebanon from the 1940s to the 1970s. So he takes these photographs, which existed in the studio of a local photographer in South Lebanon named Hashem El-Madani, and then he puts them back into circulation. He curates them, in effect, right? He takes them from the negative, makes them into photographs, rearranges them, and then exhibits them. So this is one example of one of his photographs. Here's another. So he has a whole series of photographs of this figure, Abed the tailor, that he puts back into circulation. And to me, this contemporary artist, Akram Zaatari's curation of these photographs brings their queer valences to the fore that they may not have had, actually, if you were just like stumbling into Hashem El-Madani's studio and looking around, right? It's Zaatari as a contemporary artist that makes these photographs queer to a certain extent, right? And so in that sense, Zaatari, this contemporary Beirut-based artist, uses that backward glance to I think, critique a heteronormative present. So.
And reimagines.
That's right. And reimagine it. And so to me, he's conjuring forth this moment when queer bodies, desires, affiliations, right, were simply part and parcel of everyday life. Like that's what these images conjure forth to me, like the everydayness of queerness.
And it's the aesthetic of the everyday.
That's right.
Right, as opposed to the aesthetic of fetishize, which is then through a dominant narrative.
Exactly. I mean, so there's just a mundane quality to these images that I love, where queerness is simply folded into the everyday. And you see this figure embedded within this sociality, a web of sociality of lovers, perhaps, relatives, friends, right? So the other reason why this whole series of images of Abed the tailor are interesting to me is because there are so many relays of affect that animate it and that give it meaning. Mm-hmm. So there's the affective relation between Akram Zaatari as this contemporary artist looking at these images, right? And the photographer, Hashem El-Madani, right, who took this photo in 1948. That's one relay. There's the relay between Zaatari and Abed the tailor, the subject in the photograph, right? And then there's our own affective relation to these images, my own affective relation to this image, right? So the image is super specific. We know it was taken by this photographer, Hashem El-Madani, in 1948 in South Lebanon, in Saida, right? But so they have this real regional specificity. But when I first saw this image of Abed, right, I felt this kind of shock of recognition, and that's how I opened the book, that I thought, I know you, you know, because to me, Abed, that gesture, you know, that gesture is so queer, you know, there's like such beauty in that gesture. And to me, it reminded me of like, you know, being a young adult in the 90s and going to the West Side Piers and seeing all the beautiful queens, like, you know, gesturing, right? Like enacting all these beautiful performances. So that's what it conjured to me. But then, of course, the closer you get to the image, the more obscure it becomes. I don't know anything actually about Abed, what their embodiment meant to them, how their desires worked. And so I'm trying to say that, you know, this image is not transparent, right? It's multiply mediated. And what we're faced with really is our own desire for the past and for the past to mean something for us in the present. But I think that's very meaningful. Like that's what we have, right? Zaatari turning to the past to imagine this kind of more capacious present and future.
Absolutely. And so jumping to the idea of queer optic, right? And so you're circling in here, right? And so talk to us a little bit, because you've talked to us a little bit about radical rationality, this idea, right, of this past, present, and future. So talk to us now a little bit about the idea, this queer optic, and the very meanings, right? Because I think this intersects with what you've been talking about thus far.
Yeah, absolutely. So the notion of a queer optic is one that's really central in this book. And a queer optic is a disorderly, unruly, multi-focused mode of vision, right? That veers towards multiple objects, multiple spaces, multiple temporalities simultaneously. So in the book, I'm actually I'm instantiating this queer optic and how I approach the texts that I put in conversation. So I'll put Akram Zaatari in relation to Saidiya Hartman, right? That doesn't seem like they go together. Like, why would they go together? But within this kind of queer optic that I'm enacting for you, they actually do go together. They tell us something really interesting about how we access the past that is actually occluded to us, you know, how we imagine the past, right? So for me, you know, a queer optic is a way of reading. It's a way of reading the aesthetic, right? That makes apparent non-normative bodies, desires, practices, and affiliations that have been occluded within dominant history. So that's the work that it does. So it's a way of reading the aesthetic.
Thank you very much. And so I'm going to come back to the aesthetic, but let's for this question, really, in Unruly Visions, you talk about, quote, this map out the triangulated relation, right, between the conceptual categories of archive, region, and aesthetics, right? And you're really this idea of aesthetic practices within queer diaspora, right? And how we mobilize, which you just talk about these categories. Could you speak to the role of queer women's desire in this cartography? Because as we think about the images, as we think about narratives, and I'm saying that also in relation to what you just said about, right, pairing even with someone like Saidiya Hartman, who might not be seen as the right pair in this moment. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think I can get to that question by giving you two examples that come out of the book. So one of my chapters is on a small independent film that came out exactly 10 years ago called Mosquita y Mari. It's a, do you know that film, Lisa? Yeah. So it's a really lovely film. I teach it pretty often in my classes. It's by the Latina lesbian filmmaker Aurora Guerrero. And it's set in Huntington Park, which is a Latinx enclave in LA. And it's a queer coming of age story focused on two Latinx girls, and one of whom is undocumented. And, you know, what I love about this film is how it depicts that in-between space of adolescence, of being minor, right? Like literally they're minors.
Yes.
They're also in a minor space, right?
Yes.
They're in the space that doesn't rate as anywhere really, you know? It's this random, you know, suburb in LA, right? And this state of that in-betweenness is what I call the state of suspension. And of course, that state of suspension is also the state of being undocumented, right? It's the state of being suspended between childhood and adulthood. It's that moment when desire hasn't congealed into identity. And the film captures that so beautifully. So for me, the desire between these two girls, right, is inextricable from place. And this is where, you know, the question of region again comes in,
Yes.
right? It's inextricable from the specificity of the space that, as Guerrero says, is just west of East LA. Like, where is that? You know? So to my mind, you know, the film maps out in some ways the queerness of the region. It suffuses the space of the region with queerness. And it suggests that, you know, there are these spaces within the nation that have their own logic and sexuality, their own logic of sexuality, their own logic of gender, that we simply don't recognize because it's not the metronormative centers of like WeHo or what is the center of NYC, the queer center of NYC now? I don't even know.
I don't even know.
But you know, it's not that, right?
Right, exactly. That these logics are differentiated, right? Based on region, based on, absolutely.
Precisely,
Yes.
precisely. And so, you know, I think what the film does is really suffuse the space with queer female desire. And doing that completely dislodges heteronormative notions of immigrant families and what they are, what they look like.
And what they're supposed to be.
What they're supposed to be, right? And it dislodges homonormative narratives of what the gay and lesbian subject is supposed to be, right? Like you don't look at these girls and think like, you know, the proper lesbian subject, right? So I think, so that's one example of how, you know, queer female desire maps this kind of different cartography for me in the book. And if I may, I'll give you just one more example. Oh, so this is a quote from that chapter where I say, queer desire, relationality, and identification function as a kind of propulsive force that throws one off a normative life course and into a different life trajectory that is in fact open-ended with no fixed itinerary or ending. And so that's what I love about queerness and queer female desire here. It's like throwing them off track in really productive ways, right? And maybe mapping other pathways, right? Other geographies. So this is the other example I wanted to give you. It's from the work of Tracy Moffat, who's an Indigenous Australian artist. This piece is called As I Lay Back on My Ancestral Land. And the vantage point of the photograph is from the earth as it sort of is pointed up into the sky. And you see, you know, this kind of mapping of this naked female, this nude female figure mapped onto sky, sort of superimposed onto sky and earth. And I think it's such an interesting vantage point because it's not, you know, the usual view of the landscape photograph is that omniscient, all-seeing view from up on high, right? And this is actually from the bottom going up. So it's sort of eschewing mastery in that sense, right? But then, you know, she's making this really powerful claim to claim this space as her ancestral land, right? Through queer female bodies and queer female desire, right? As an Indigenous woman in Australia, who she herself bears multiple legacies of displacement and dispossession. So here's another image from that work. So in both these cases, I see queer female bodies, queer female desires as a kind of portal to other pathways, right? To other geographies, other cartographies.
Mhm. Absolutely. And through, right, a reimagining of even land in this way, right? Absolutely. Okay, so please drop your questions in. We have about 10 more minutes of conversation, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, something like that. Maybe not even 10 minutes now that I look at my clock. Okay, more like 8 minutes, sorry. All right. So let me talk a little bit about I want to make sure I get to your next research, et cetera. So as we think about, and this is a particular question for our students, right, and sort of our learners out there, as we think about this idea of normativity, right, and whether that we're talking about heteronormativity, the logics of normativity, the logics of patriarchy, and particularly even the logic of a particular kind of queerness.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about the importance of disruption, right, of normative lenses, right, and why that's so important, even as you think about the trajectory of your own work, right? Because we started with how you were your first work, and then moving into this intersectional work, right, which is also about that disruption.
Yeah, I mean, I think all my work, and thank you for picking up, I mean, all my work is about disrupting normative lenses, right? Disrupting normative ways of seeing. And that's both heteronormative ways of seeing that would include queerness and queer bodies, affiliations, identities, desires, but also homonormative ways of seeing that, as I suggested, can only recognize queerness in particular forms, in particular places, and on particular bodies. So, you know, that's what I think the aesthetic practices of queer diaspora do, is disrupt normativity in all of these different spaces. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Thank you for that. Thank you. So let me, this question, I actually like this question. So have you ever been surprised by an example of queer imagining, something that, especially in light of this sort of idea of ambivalent misunderstandings of home that are in flux, right? So talk to us a little bit about that. And then next we'll get to some of your additional work. Yeah.
Well, I think what surprises me is my own queer imaginings, in that the way in which radically dissimilar work, or work that appears to be radically dissimilar, like Saidiya Hartman and, Akram Zaatari, actually speak to each other through this kind of queer sensibility, this queer optic that I'm bringing to it. So, in another one of my chapters, which is on how the aesthetic practices of queer diaspora disorganizes these heteronormative tropes of immigrant family. That's a chapter where I look at Mosquita Imari. Yeah. I put Mosquita Imari in conversation with the work of the South Asian diasporic artist, Chitra Ganesh, whose work I really love. And Chitra goes to her own family photographs in order to, again, sort of say something different about the formation of the immigrant subject, and particularly the immigrant girl subject. Yeah. And she's tracing a kind of queer genealogy for herself through the figure of the mother, through the figure of the immigrant mother, which I think is so radical in so many ways. But, so what I'm doing
especially how the immigrant mother is like often pictured or imagined through, right, dominant structures, right? It's not about queerness at all, I think, is what I hear you saying. And then this is a radical reimagining and disruption to the art, to the narrative, right? The narrative arc.
In fact, the immigrant mother is the opposite, is imagined as the opposite of queerness. She's like the embodiment of tradition and home and family, and is enjoined to be that in the diaspora. So what I think an artist like Ganesh is doing is actually sort of tracing her own queer genealogy through the figure of the mother, which completely, I mean, talk about disruption, it's completely messing up the figure, the symbolic figure of the woman in relation to both nation and diaspora.
Yeah, and the domestic sphere as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, going back to your question of what surprises me, I mean, I think it's how this work sort of resonates with each other in ways that I find so unexpected, and in some ways, this is where I feel like the work, the objects hail me, like they find me. I'm constantly surprised by what I'm drawn to and what speaks to me. It's like, oh, that, that should speak to me, but it's not, but that is, and it's often work that doesn't announce itself as queer in an obvious way,
Mm-hmm. But that goes back to that day-to-day, right? Which is the day-to-day queer aesthetic is not necessarily, right, that which is meta. It's about the practice of every day and how it appears, and sort of, which is what you're talking about even from the very beginning, and this idea of the aesthetic and queering the everyday in terms of the optic. My next question for you before I open it up for questions is, how has your study of thinking about queerness in terms of aesthetics, region, diasporic art informed how you approach other research, right? In terms of your own work and your work with students. And I'm going to leave what's next for you until later. But right now, just saying, talk to us a little bit of how it's informed your work in terms of that growth and that arc of growth, or difference, I guess is the right word.
I love that you asked about students, because I'm teaching an undergraduate class right now called Queer Cultures, and a big focus of that class is on queer of color and queer diasporic aesthetic practices. So all of my research comes to bear in this class, right? So I'm looking at, forms of queer performance, film, video. I'm trying to have the students think diasporically and transnationally. I really want these students to know the incredible body of work that queer artists of color, queer diasporic artists have done before them, right? In the, at least since the 80s and 90s. And what really struck me, Lisa, is that they don't know this work, right? So the vast majority of my students had never heard of Marlon Riggs, had never seen Isaac Julian's work,
that just makes me feel old now, but besides that.
Well, right. The work of Audre Lorde, This Bridge Will Call My Back, like all of that work that for our generation, Lisa, like was so central and so formative, they don't know it. And they don't know it because we haven't taught it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's up to us, our generation of queer scholars, to teach that work and to make them understand, the what you said in the beginning, the kind of shoulders that we're standing on, who our queer ancestors are, right? So that they don't reinvent the wheel, so that they know that this work has happened, and so that they can build off it, right? Yeah. So, I just want to end with this example of, just last week, I showed that famous clip of Silvia Rivera at the Gay Liberation March in 1973, when she's just completely calling out the white normativity, the class normativity, the gender normativity of this like emergent gay lesbian movement. And, she's basically saying, right, she's demanding that these white middle-class gays and lesbians care about trans, poor, incarcerated, homeless people. And to me, she's precisely enacting that kind of radical, intersectional, feminist, queer politics in her body, like quite literally in her body, that I want to have as a model for the work that I do. And I want the students to realize, like, this is what trans politics means, right? This is what queer trans politics means. It's not some narrow rights-oriented project. It's
complicated
really
and intersectional, right? In terms of what you've talked about. Thank you. Now, are there questions? Please drop your questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to ask another question as I'm waiting for more questions to come forward. And before I do that, I'm doing a shameless plug before I do this.
I'm going to stop my share.
Here's the book. Please buy the book. Can you see I'm putting the book in front of my face? Here's the book. Please buy the book. It's available. You can get it, right? There are multiple ways to get it. And I just want to say again, it's a really, 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 really important text and contribution to not just to queer studies, as people will say, but to academic intellectual movements as we think about legacy and moving forward. So sorry, I back up so you can see it more. Okay, so my next question is, tell us about a little bit about what's next for you. What's next? What's on the horizon? You don't have to give us anything that's copyrighted or, not maybe writing the funding proposal for, but enough so that we have a little tidbit of what's next.
Well, I'll just say, I think I don't want to write another monograph in a typical way anymore. I'm done with that. I think I want to write in collaboration with others. So I'm working with a friend and colleague at Berkeley, Sonia Katyal, and we're thinking of doing a book on queer visual futures that's in dialogue with other artists as well. So thinking about our voices in collaboration with other artists, because I think that's what's so enjoyable for me,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And talk about what fun that will be. So I do have a couple questions here. So the first question is really about you crossing boundaries of your own identity, right? So you have your own identity, and then thinking about yourself in a language that has the power of representing queer diasporas, right? So it's this both and, right? So situating yourself, right, but also thinking about the meta, which is really, right. And this question is, I'm thinking of what you including your second book, the Diaspora, South Asian, Lebanese, etc. And the last part of it is how, and your queerness completed their own format of diaspora. In other words, what did you find exciting along the journey, right? So as you think about this combo of really thinking about yourself, how do you think about the meta, and what's exciting about all of those possibilities?
Well, I think...
and thank you, Ellison. Okay.
Thank you for the question. The first book, Impossible Desires, really came out of my experience around activism in the mid to mid 90s, really early mid 90s in New York City, with queer of color organizations. And Lisa, I know you were a part of that as well, right? Like that was such an important moment of queer organizing. So, the book was focused on sort of South Asian public culture, but in fact, there was so many connections that we were making with other communities of color all the time, including the Irish queer organization, like giving us tips in terms of how to deal with a really conservative diasporic community, right? So we were always moving beyond the identitarian confines. And so I think the second book really instantiates that, like that we can be rooted in sort of the specificity of our histories, but always thinking about those connections, right? That are so formative for us.
That's great. And the second question here is really about, we talked a little bit about the journey, right? What drew you to this research a little bit, but how has it shaped your leadership journey? We know you're the director of Gender and Sexuality Studies here at NYU. We know, of course, you have this Mellon grant. So talk to us a little bit about how it shaped you in terms of your work, right?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So I took over as director of the Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality at NYU in 2017. And I was building on the work of the amazing directors that had come before me, Carolyn Dinshaw and Anne Pellegrini in particular. And they'd already created the center as a kind of intersectional space, but I was very aware that I was the first woman of color to be leading it, first person of color in general. And so for me, the charge was to foreground precisely those questions around race and transnationalism in particular, and make it really a kind of global center. And so to think about gender and sexuality transnationally. And so that the focus of my research, as you can see in relation to the collective, has completely informed the kind of administrative roles that I take on and that I actually like enjoy. Yeah.
Terrific. And I'm going to just say in the chat right now, what we have is you can look in there and please note we have learned more about the Center for the Study of Gender and Sexuality at NYU. And please tell us about some of your upcoming events.
So as I said, we have this opening tomorrow night of the exhibition of Shazia Sekunder's photographs, and I really hope you can join us for that. Then the other thing we have is that we have 2 book launches coming up of collective members that I think really exemplify the spirit of the collective. One is by Manijay Maradian, who's a professor at Barnard in gender studies, who's written a really fabulous book on Iranian student revolutionaries in the US. And thinking about, you know, Iranian feminism in particular at this moment, I think is wonderful. So do tune in for that. And then the other is our collective member from Rutgers, Carlos de Sena, who's written an amazing book on queer Caribbean spiritualities and thinking transnationally around queerness and spirituality in relation to the Caribbean diaspora. So I think both of those, you know, sort of show you the kind of reach of the work that we're doing.
And we didn't get to talk about, and I should just a little bit, there is reference to spirituality and really thinking about queer spiritualities, really, and linking back to the work of Jackie Alexander in this text. We don't have time for questions. That's a teaser for everyone out there so that you can also know that there's more in this text. Before I wrap it up, and just, we always like to ask this is just a question that we like to ask because we like for our students to know that we're out there not just always working 24 hours a day. So tell us about some of the things that actually bring you joy in your work, in the things that you do. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, talking to you brings me joy. No, truly. You know, being in the classroom brings me joy. And thinking with others, thinking collectively, working collectively. So I would say sort of being with in general. And that being with is also like in the space of like a queer dance club or, you know, seeing the kind of endlessly imaginative ways in which queers of color are constantly sort of creating new ways of being in the world. Like I love seeing that. I love, you know, seeing the kind of art people are creating. I just went to the amazing show at the New Museum of Wangechi Mutu's work. I just felt elated by that. And then of course I love like the typical, I love, you know, being in the mountains. I love being in water, you know, I love being in nature. So a lot of things bring me joy, but that's a lovely question. Thank you.
Thank you. We actually have a few comments about thank you for this wonderful presentation and leading the way. So I would like to say thank you. I know we're going to run out of time here soon. I always try to be on time. We got about 5 minutes left. So let me just say this, as we know, this book is just absolutely gorgeous. And as Tamar Shinarian has said for the diaspora, Gopinath, quote, not only offers us new visions, but seeks to help us traverse, challenge, and perhaps get over traditional, conventional, and straightforward ways of seeing things. Thank you for this text. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you. I do want to say, please attend the events that were mentioned. Particularly for the center. We hope that you'll be able to join Professor Gopinath and others for those events. Thank you for being with us today for today's program. Thank you to our captioners and again to everyone behind the scenes. I do have to give one shout out for our program coming up. Later this week, we have an additional program focusing on international Women's Day, as this conversation did, and it's a conversation with Susan Goldberg, the new president and CEO of GBH, and that will be on Wednesday, March 8th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's so that we can also catch our other campuses, a couple of them, because of the global conversations. Gayatri, I cannot thank you enough.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for your fabulous questions, for engaging really deeply with my book. I really appreciate it. Not all interviewers read the book, so you know, you
And you can tell.
And you can tell, but thank you so much for that. And
thank you.
Again, I'm just so honored to have done this, and for, you know, for being with all of you. And thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it.
And one last toast again, congratulations on the Dorothy Irene Height Award. We could not be more happy to celebrate you in this way. And there's an official award coming, but right now we have the toast since we're on Zoom. So you'll see that next time, you'll see that next to the painting in the back. So thank you again, everyone. Please continue to take good care, and we will see you at our next program.
Thank you. Bye.